Welcome back to the channel where we remember the women who once lit up the screen, the stage, and the hearts of millions. Today, we continue our tribute to famous female celebrities who passed away in their 80s, women who gave the world their voices, their talent, and their stories across long and meaningful lives. Behind the spotlight were lives filled with personal battles, quiet goodbyes, and the grace of aging with strength. Some left us peacefully, others after long struggles we never saw. But each of them left behind a legacy that deserves to be remembered. These weren't just public figures, they were mothers, daughters, icons, and quiet warriors who shaped the world in more ways than we'll ever fully understand. Let's take a moment to honor their journeys, their last days, and everything they gave us while they were here. In Whitfield, a talented American actress whose life was filled with purpose, creativity, and compassion, and whose passing came as a heartbreaking shock to everyone who loved her. Anne tragically died at the age of 85 on February 15, 2024, after an unexpected accident during a walk in her neighborhood near Burien, Washington. She was rushed to Valley Memorial Hospital in Yakima, where she passed away surrounded by her family, thanks to the quick help of neighbors who provided medical assistance, giving her loved ones the rare and precious gift to say goodbye. Her death was sudden and devastating for those who knew her, especially because just weeks before, she had been hiking in the Dolomites of Italy to celebrate her 85th birthday. That was Anne, full of life, always moving, always giving. Born in Oxford, Mississippi in 1938, Anne grew up as the only child of a band director and a drama teacher. Her journey into the spotlight started early. By age 4, she was acting, with her mother as her coach. At just 7, she landed roles on major radio shows like One Man's Family and the Phil Harris Ellis Faye Show. But her big break came at 15, when she was cast as Susan Waverly in the classic film White Christmas, acting alongside legends like Bing Crosby and Rosemary Clooney. That role became a part of movie history, and she was able to watch the film one final time with her family this past December during its 70th anniversary. Throughout the 50s and 60s, Anne lit up television screens across America, appearing in popular shows like Perry Mason, Gunsmoke, Cheyenne, Bonanza, The $6 Million Man, and many more. She acted alongside rising stars like Jack Nicholson and Robert Redford, and her presence on screen was always warm, genuine, and memorable. But Anne wasn't just a performer. She was a deeply thoughtful woman who eventually stepped away from Hollywood in the 1970s because, in her words, there just weren't enough trees in Los Angeles. She moved to Washington State, went back to college in her 40s to earn a degree in communications, and began working at the Department of Ecology, where she became a fierce advocate for clean water and environmental causes. Her efforts there helped shape policies still in use today. Even in retirement, she was constantly active, teaching English to refugees, marching for women's rights, fighting climate change, feeding the homeless on holidays, and organizing for political fairness. Her energy was unmatched, and believed deeply in justice, kindness, and preserving the beauty of the world for future generations. She loved hiking, traveling, and sharing life's wonders with her grandchildren, taking each of them on individual trips to different countries so they could see the world through her eyes, a place full of love and connection. In the days leading up to her death, she was planning her next trip with her youngest grandkids. Her life was rich with meaning and service, and she gave her all to her family, her community, and the planet. Anne Whitfield's passing was not only tragic because of how it happened, but because the world lost someone who was still giving, still dreaming, still moving. Her sudden death leaves a painful hole in many hearts, but her spirit lives on in her children, her 7 grandchildren, the many people she helped, and the millions who will forever remember her smile and White Christmas. Estelle Getty, the tiny woman with a giant spirit who brought laughter to millions but quietly endured one of the most heartbreaking illnesses in her final years. Estelle, best known for her role as Sophia Petrillo on The Golden Girls, died just 3 days before her 85th birthday on July 22, 2008, after a long and painful struggle with Lewy body dementia, a cruel disease that slowly took her memory, her ability to recognize loved ones, and eventually her life. It was this same illness that kept her away from reunions and public events in her final years, as it progressed to the point where even her dearest co-stars, like B. Arthur and Betty White, could no longer hold a conversation with her. She had also been misdiagnosed with Parkinson's and Alzheimer's along the way, and the confusion, memory loss, and physical symptoms only worsened over time. Her health began declining in the late 1990s, and by the early 2000s, she disappeared from the public eye altogether, retiring quietly and spending her last years in her Hollywood Hills home, surrounded by family, but battling a condition that stole everything from her except her soul. Estelle's decline was not sudden. She had been showing signs even during the later seasons of The Golden Girls, where she struggled with remembering her lines and had to use cue cards, despite decades of stage work before television. Born Estelle Getty on July 25, 1923, in New York City to Polish Jewish immigrants, she grew up watching vaudeville shows with her father and dreaming of becoming a performer. But that dream wasn't easy. She worked for years in community theater, raising her 2 sons, working as a secretary, and holding on to hope. She didn't get her big break until she was in her 60s, when she was cast in Harvey Fierstein's Broadway play Torch Song Trilogy, a role that showcased her gift for both comedy and deep emotion. That role eventually led her to The Golden Girls, where she nearly lost the part of Sophia for looking too young to play B. Arthur's mother. But with a little makeup and a lot of heart, she became one of the show's biggest stars, loved for her sharp tongue, deadpan delivery, and emotional depth. She won an Emmy and a Golden Globe, and her character became a fan favorite across the world. Off-screen, she was just as strong. Estelle was an outspoken supporter of gay rights and AIDS awareness, caring for her nephew as he battled HIV and speaking up for causes many others avoided. She was married to Arthur Gettleman from 1947 until his death in 2004, and despite living apart during her time in Hollywood, they stayed devoted to one another. Estelle was not just an actress. She was proof that it's never too late to succeed, and that kindness and strength can live inside the smallest person. Her death marked the end of a beautiful, hard-fought journey. She may be gone, but the joy she gave lives on in every line Sophia ever delivered, and in the hearts of those who found comfort and laughter in her voice. Toni Morrison, one of the most powerful voices in American literature, who passed away on August 5, 2019, at the age of 88 from complications of pneumonia at Montefiore Medical Center in the Bronx, New York. In her final days, she had been battling the illness quietly, surrounded by close loved ones, but her health quickly declined, and the infection became too severe for her body to fight off. The world lost more than a writer that day. It lost a storyteller who had given life to voices that had long been ignored. Toni was born as Chloe Ardelia Wofford on February 18, 1931, in Lorain, Ohio, in a working-class black family that instilled in her a deep love of language, music, and heritage. Her early life was marked by racism and hardship, including a terrifying moment when her landlord set their house on fire while the family was still inside due to unpaid rent. But instead of falling into fear, her family chose to laugh in the face of cruelty. That resilience shaped her spirit. After studying English at Howard University and earning a master's degree at Cornell, she went on to become the first black female editor of fiction at Random House, while raising 2 sons as a single mother after her divorce. Her writing career started later in life, with her debut novel, The Bluest Eye, published at age 39, but it didn't take long for her to make history. With Song of Solomon, she won the National Book Critics Circle Award. Beloved, inspired by a real-life story of an enslaved woman, earned her the Pulitzer Prize. And in 1993, she became the first black woman to receive the Nobel Prize in Literature. Through her 11 novels, children's books, plays, and essays, she explored the pain, love, trauma, and power of the Black American experience, especially through the eyes of black women. Her writing didn't follow straight lines. It carried the weight of generations, memories, and struggle, wrapped in language that felt like poetry. Even in her later years, she never stopped creating or speaking out. She taught at Princeton, was awarded the Presidential Medal of Freedom by Barack Obama, and remained a fierce advocate for free expression. But behind the honors was a woman shaped by both beauty and pain. Her younger son Slade died from cancer in 2010, and she carried that heartbreak with quiet strength. When Morrison passed, tributes poured in from around the world, and thousands gathered in New York to say goodbye, with Oprah, Angela Davis, and Ta-Nehisi Coates among those remembering her brilliance. Her death was not just the loss of a person, but the end of a living legacy that had changed literature forever. She had given voice to the forgotten, the silenced, and the overlooked. And though pneumonia took her physical presence, her words remain alive, reminding us of the truth, beauty, and pain that shaped her and all of us. Patricia Neal, a gifted American actress whose life was as dramatic and heartbreaking as any role she ever played on screen. Patricia died on August 8, 2010, at the age of 84, after a hard-fought battle with lung cancer, passing away peacefully at her home in Edgartown, Massachusetts, surrounded by her family. Her final months were marked by quiet strength and stubborn determination, qualities that defined her entire life. She had been a longtime smoker, and though she'd already survived devastating health setbacks before, this time, the cancer took over. In her last public appearance just days before her death, she showed her signature grace and humor at a charity event on Martha's Vineyard, a place she had loved for decades. Those close to her said she faced her illness with dignity and even laughter, saying she intended to live until she died. And that's exactly what she did. But Patricia Neal's story isn't just about how she died. It's about how many times she survived what should have been the end. In 1965, while pregnant with her 5th child, Patricia suffered 3 massive strokes that left her in a coma for 3 weeks. When she woke up, she couldn't speak, couldn't move the right side of her body, and couldn't even recognize the alphabet. The world expected she would never recover, and Variety magazine even mistakenly published her obituary. But with the unshakable help of her husband, author Roald Dahl, and a team of volunteers, she underwent a grueling, experimental recovery program that helped her relearn how to walk, talk, and act. Just 3 years later, she made a triumphant return to the screen and earned another Oscar nomination for The Subject Was Roses. Born Patsy Louise Neal in Packard, Kentucky, in 1926, she grew up in Knoxville, Tennessee, where she fell in love with acting at just 10 years old. After studying drama at Northwestern University, she moved to New York and quickly found success on Broadway, winning a Tony Award at age 21. Hollywood soon followed. She starred in powerful roles in The Fountainhead, A Face in the Crowd, Breakfast at Tiffany's, and won the Academy Award for Best Actress for her performance in HUD 1963. But behind the fame was a life full of private pain. Her love affair with married actor Gary Cooper ended in heartbreak and abuse. Her marriage to Dahl, though long, was rocked by tragedy and betrayal. They lost their daughter Olivia to measles at age 7, and their infant son Theo suffered brain damage in a horrific accident. Eventually, Dahl's affair with Patricia's close friend ended their marriage. Still, she carried on. She wrote a brutally honest autobiography, As I Am, and used her story to help others, founding a rehabilitation center for stroke victims in Tennessee. Patricia Neal wasn't just an actress. She was a woman who endured loss, illness, betrayal, and unimaginable grief, but kept moving forward with fierce courage. In her last years, she found peace in her faith, converting to Catholicism just months before she died. She was laid to rest in the Abbey of Regina Latis in Connecticut, where her dear friend, former actress Dolores Hart, had become a nun. Patricia Neal's legacy isn't just in her awards or her films. It's in her survival, her refusal to give in, and the way she turned tragedy into strength, not just for herself, but for countless others. Jessica Walter, a woman whose voice, face, and sharp wit left a deep mark on Hollywood and in the hearts of millions. Jessica passed away in her sleep on March 24, 2021, at her home in Manhattan. She was 80 years old. While no specific cause of death was publicly shared, her passing was sudden and peaceful, which made the news even more heartbreaking for fans and colleagues alike. Her final days weren't marked by any known illness or long hospital stays, just the quiet end to a long and brilliant life, gone without warning. Her daughter, Brooke, confirmed the news with a heavy heart, describing her mom as someone who found joy in bringing stories to life, both on screen and off. Born on January 31, 1941, in Brooklyn and raised in Queens, Jessica's journey started in a musical and artistic family. Her father was a musician with the NBC Symphony Orchestra, and her mother was a teacher. She studied at the High School of Performing Arts in Manhattan, where her passion for acting took root. Her career spanned over 60 years, filled with more than 170 roles across film, TV, and theater. She first caught attention in the 1960s with bold performances in films like Lilith, The Group, and Grand Prix. But it was her chilling portrayal of a psychotic fan in Clint Eastwood's play Misty for Me that truly put her on the map and earned her a Golden Globe nomination. She later won an Emmy Award for playing the lead in Amy Prentice, a spin-off of Ironside, and continued to be a familiar face on television for decades. But for many, she will always be remembered as the unforgettable Lucille Bluth from Arrested Development, a sharp-tongued, glamorous matriarch who could silence a room with just one look. Jessica also found a new wave of popularity as the voice of Mallory Archer in the hit animated series Archer, where her performance became a cornerstone of the show's success. Behind the scenes, she was known for her kindness, her humor, and her absolute professionalism. She was married to actor Ron Liebman until his death in 2019, and together they worked on many stage and screen projects, including Law and Order and Dummy. Her death not only ended a legendary career, but left a space that can't be filled, because actresses like Jessica don't come around often. She was strong, smart, wickedly funny, and never afraid to play complicated, flawed women. Jessica Walter wasn't just a character on a screen. She was a powerhouse, and she told stories in a way that made them unforgettable. She is survived by her daughter Brooke and grandson Micah. And while the world has lost a remarkable artist, her work, and the impact she made, will never be forgotten. Peggy Lee, born Norma Dolores Ekstrom, whose soft, smoky voice made her one of the most iconic female singers in American music history, but whose final years were marked by serious health struggles and pain that slowly wore her down. After battling years of illnesses, including diabetes, complications from multiple falls, and a stroke that impaired her speech, Peggy died of a heart attack at her Bel Air home on January 21, 2002, at the age of 81. In her last days, she had become mostly confined to a wheelchair, her body weakened by the long fight, but she continued performing as long as she possibly could, even returning to the stage after heart surgeries and barely surviving a near-fatal fall in 1976. Her daughter, Nikki Lee Foster, was by her side when she passed, bringing some comfort in those final moments. Peggy had already suffered so much, physically and emotionally, and her death closed the chapter on a life that had been full of triumph, but also deep pain. Her journey began in Jamestown, North Dakota, where she lost her mother at age 4 and suffered abuse from a stepmother, a trauma she would later sing about in her autobiographical stage musical Peg. She began singing as a teenager on local radio, eventually landing a spot with Benny Goodman's orchestra, where her sultry performance of "Why Don't You Do Right" launched her to stardom. But behind that elegant stage presence was a woman who struggled through broken marriages, through her husband Dave Barber's alcoholism, and through the pressures of fame. She turned that pain into timeless music, co-writing hundreds of songs including "Manana" and "It's a Good Day," and giving the world unforgettable recordings like "Fever" and "Is That All There Is?", which earned her a Grammy. Peggy also made a mark in film, earning an Oscar nomination for Pete Kelly's Blues and voicing characters in Disney's Lady and the Tramp, even winning a major lawsuit later in life to claim her share of the profits. But it was her voice, gentle, breathy, full of feeling, that truly defined her, setting her apart in an era full of noise. She didn't shout to be heard, she whispered, and the world listened. Even when strokes, surgeries, and disease tried to silence her, Peggy kept singing, kept writing, and kept sharing her story until her heart finally gave out. She left behind a massive catalog of over 1,100 songs and a legacy that continues to inspire new generations. Her death was more than the end of a life. It was the fading of a voice that had once carried so much emotion, strength, and truth. Helen Keller, an extraordinary American author and activist who defied every limit life placed on her, but whose final years were quietly filled with a physical decline that slowly ended one of the most remarkable lives ever lived. Helen died in her sleep on June 1, 1968, at her home, Arkin Ridge in Easton, Connecticut, after suffering a series of strokes that had left her increasingly frail and silent in her last 7 years. Though she had once traveled the world, spoken to crowds, met world leaders, and fought for justice, those final days were spent mostly in isolation, her body giving up after decades of relentless effort. The strokes had taken much of her energy and clarity, but not her legacy. She was 87 years old. Born in Tuscumbia, Alabama in 1880, Helen lost her sight and hearing at just 19 months old after an illness that doctors at the time couldn't explain, likely meningitis or scarlet fever. That illness cut her off from the world before she could even speak full sentences, leaving her trapped in silence and darkness. As a child, she became wild with frustration, unable to communicate until a teacher named Anne Sullivan arrived in her life when Helen was 7. That meeting changed everything. Anne taught Helen how to spell words into her palm, and the breakthrough moment came when Helen realized that the cool rush of water on her hand had a name. That moment opened the world to her. She went on to graduate from Radcliffe College, becoming the first deafblind person in America to earn a Bachelor of Arts degree. With Anne always at her side, Helen went on to write 14 books, deliver hundreds of speeches, and campaign tirelessly for the rights of people with disabilities, for women's suffrage, for workers, and for peace. She co-founded the American Civil Liberties Union, raised money for the blind across the world, and brought comfort to injured soldiers in World War II. But behind that global fame was a woman who never stopped struggling, who worked for decades to learn to speak despite never fully liking how her voice sounded, who endured loss after loss, including Anne's death in 1936, and who kept going long after most would have stopped. Her body, though, could only carry her so far. After the strokes hit in the early 1960s, Helen could no longer travel or speak in public. The same hands that had once signed words to millions now rested still. Yet even as her strength faded, her courage never did. When she died peacefully in her bed, she left behind not just a life story, but a symbol of human strength. Her ashes were buried beside Anne Sullivan and Polly Thompson, her lifelong companions, at the Washington National Cathedral. Helen Keller didn't just live with disability. She changed how the world saw it. She showed that a girl born into silence and darkness could still speak to the hearts of millions. And even in her quiet final days, she remained someone who had already said more with her life than most do with a voice. Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a fierce and tireless fighter for justice who died on September 18, 2020, at the age of 87 from complications of metastatic pancreatic cancer. In the final years of her life, she battled her illness with unbelievable strength, enduring multiple hospitalizations, surgeries, and treatments, often returning to the bench within days of each procedure. From a stent placed in her heart, to a fall that fractured her ribs, to lung surgery and radiation for tumors in her pancreas, she never let pain or fatigue stop her. Even in 2020, just months before her death, she continued chemotherapy quietly while doing the work she loved, never missing a session unless absolutely necessary. Her death came just 6 weeks before the presidential election, and she left behind a heartbreaking final wish: that she not be replaced until a new president was installed. But her death triggered a political storm, and within days, Amy Coney Barrett was confirmed to take her seat, shifting the court in a direction Ginsburg fought her whole life to balance. Born in Brooklyn in 1933, Ruth lost her mother to cancer just before finishing high school and later lost her sister at an early age too. Despite facing deep personal loss and relentless gender discrimination, she became the second woman and the first Jewish woman to sit on the United States Supreme Court. At Harvard Law, she was one of only 9 women in a class of 500, juggling motherhood and academics while also caring for her husband Martin as he battled testicular cancer. When he recovered, she transferred to Columbia Law School and graduated at the top of her class. Even with those credentials, job offers didn't come easily because she was a woman, a mother, and Jewish. But she never stopped pushing. She clerked for a federal judge, taught law at Rutgers and Columbia, and eventually became the first tenured female professor at Columbia Law. In the 1970s, she co-founded the ACLU's Women's Rights Project and argued 6 landmark gender discrimination cases before the Supreme Court, winning 5. Her belief that the law should treat all people equally, regardless of gender, shaped her life's mission. In 1993, President Clinton appointed her to the Supreme Court, where she served for 27 years, often becoming the most powerful voice for women's rights, workers' rights, and civil liberties. She became a cultural icon, lovingly nicknamed the Notorious RBG for her powerful dissents and sharp intellect. She worked out regularly with a personal trainer, and even in her 80s could do 20 push-ups. But behind all that strength was a woman who'd suffered, persevered, and outlasted every challenge thrown her way, until cancer finally took her life. On the day she died, candles, flowers, and handwritten notes filled the steps of the Supreme Court. She became the first woman to lie in state at the U.S. Capitol. Her body was laid to rest beside her beloved husband in Arlington National Cemetery. Ruth Bader Ginsburg didn't just change the law, she changed lives. She stood up when others stayed silent. She held on when it would have been easier to let go. And though she is gone, the path she cleared for others will never be forgotten. Adriana Costello, the American actress and singer whose voice gave life to one of the most beloved characters in animation history, but whose own life was marked by both enchantment and quiet sorrow. She tragically passed away from cancer on January 19, 1997, in her Los Angeles home at the age of 80. Her final days were spent in the same city where her voice had once echoed from every cinema screen. Yet her departure came quietly, far from the spotlight that had once embraced her. She had battled the disease privately, her death marking the end of a life that began with the world at her feet and ended in near anonymity. Adriana was only 18 when she made history as the voice of Snow White in Walt Disney's first full-length animated feature, Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs 1937, a role she landed after overhearing a phone call between Disney's casting director and her father, a vocal coach, and then boldly offering herself. Her voice, soft, sweet, full of innocence, became iconic, but it was also the beginning of a strange kind of imprisonment. Walt Disney, determined to preserve the fantasy of Snow White, forbade her voice from being used anywhere else. She wasn't credited, wasn't allowed to pursue other major roles, and her attempts to build a career beyond Disney were blocked by the very studio that had discovered her. She was blacklisted, unheard and unseen beyond a few uncredited cameos in The Wizard of Oz and It's a Wonderful Life. In the years that followed, she turned to opera, taught music, wrote a singing guidebook, and invested in real estate. But Snow White was always at the center of her world. Her Beverly Hills home was filled with Snow White memorabilia, from figurines to a wishing well in her front yard. And even her answering machine played, "I'm Wishing." She never stopped loving the role that brought her early fame, singing the same songs well into old age for children and fans who came to visit her. Born on May 6, 1916, in Bridgeport, Connecticut, to a musical Italian-American family, Adriana was surrounded by opera from the start. Her mother was a soprano, her father a music teacher, and her sister taught none other than Maria Callas. She studied music in Italy and later at Hollywood High School. At 19, she began work on Snow White, earning just $970 for the entire project. Yet, her voice became timeless, featured in one of the most successful and culturally significant films of all time. She never grew bitter, despite being sidelined, despite trying and failing to sue Disney for a share of the film's earnings, because she knew she had given something unforgettable to the world. She often said, "I know that my voice will never die." And in many ways it hasn't. Adriana Costello may have made only one movie that mattered, but it was a movie that mattered to millions. She lived her life with grace, love for the character that defined her, and a bittersweet awareness that her voice had become immortal while she remained just out of reach. And when she died, quietly in her home, the world lost not just a voice, but a living memory of a fairy tale that helped shape generations.